We call it the War of 1812, but the worst of it didn't happen until 1814 when Washington was burned by the British and the U.S. teetered towards collapse. Steve Vogel details 6 weeks that saved the nation in his new book, Through the Perilous Fight, and joins us now to discuss that summer 199 years ago. Good to see you.
Good seeing you, bro.
Stopping by.
Absolutely.
Okay, so give us a quick history lesson here. Why the War of 1812? How do we get into this thing and why?
Well, you know, one thing that people always forget is that it was the U.S. that declared war on Great Britain and not the other way around. I mean, we often think, well, the British just wanted to retake their colonies, but actually President Madison and a bunch of the members of Congress were really concerned about the U.S. having its sovereignty trampled by Great Britain. They were taking our sailors off of our ships. They were interfering with our trade with Europe. And Madison basically believed that if the United States didn't take some kind of action, we were going to be a vassal state to Great Britain. And the country was hugely divided on this issue. This was basically America's first war of choice.
So this war goes on for 2 years until the period that you focus on, and just down the street here, the British come and make a mess.
Right. What happens is Great Britain is tied up with fighting Napoleon in 1812, so they're not able to devote many resources to the United States, and they are angry at the United States for declaring war. They consider it an act of treachery. But in 1814, Napoleon abdicates, and so suddenly all these troops in the Duke of Wellington's army that had been tied up fighting in France were free to come over to the U.S. Admiral Cockburn was the real firebrand among the British forces here in the Chesapeake.
The bad guy in your story.
That's right. He, 200 years ago, he was absolutely the most feared man in America and the most hated. And he had been, for over a year, he'd been torching towns in the Chesapeake. And he was the one who was really advocating for a strike at the Capitol. He thought that if the British captured the seat of government, the Madison administration would be so humiliated and American people so disgusted that all support for the government might collapse. The government might, would have to flee, and the U.S. would be forced to sue for peace on British terms.
So this builds up to the climax of your book, and then the anthem and the title of your book. So actually, before we get there, who was Francis Scott Key?
You know, he was the first of a very common breed today, a Washington lawyer. He was an opponent of the war, but he also had signed up to defend Washington and Maryland when the Chesapeake was invaded by the British. One of his friends, Dr. Beans, who lived in Upper Marlboro, had been taken prisoner by the British after they burned Washington and were going back to their ships. And Key was approached by mutual friends to lead a delegation to try to win Dr. Beans's freedom. He was a 65-year-old man. They were afraid that he would die in captivity. And Key got permission from the Madison government to do this. And he sails out with a delegation out to the Chesapeake, and they find the British fleet just as the British fleet is moving up to attack Baltimore. So they agree to release the doctor, but they say, but by the way, you all are detained until after we attack Baltimore, so you're coming with us.
And he has this up-close view that inspires the song. So what does he see, and how did that come to be?
Key's out there with the British bombardment squadron, a couple of miles from the fort, exact position undetermined, but clearly in a position where he could see the bombardment. And when we sing the anthem today, the key thing we have to remember is that this whole first verse is a question. He doesn't know whether he's going to see the flag there in the morning. There's a ferocious bombardment that lasts 24 hours, and in the twilight he sees the flag is still flying there. But through this long night that follows, the bombardment reaches ever higher proportions, and then there's silence before dawn. The bombardment comes to an end, and he doesn't know if that means whether the fort is surrendered or whether the Americans have held. And not until dawn comes is he able to make out the flag. And at that moment that he's writing the words to that song, he doesn't know whether the Republic is going to survive, because if Baltimore had fallen, on the heels of Washington, everybody figured Philadelphia, New York could be next. It could be a chain reaction.
Through the Perilous Fight is the book, 6 Weeks That Saved the Nation. Steve, thanks so much for sharing that bit of history.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Brooke.
That will do it for us for tonight. We will fold things up. Hope to see you back here tomorrow.